You're listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 12th of November 2025 on Monocle Radio. Hello and welcome to The Briefing, broadcasting live from Studio 1 here at Midori House in London. I'm Chris Chermak. Coming up on today's program, Ukraine is facing a major corruption scandal that has led to the suspension of its justice minister. Our Julia Jen will bring us the latest. After that, Anita Riera is here in the studio as well. Anita, I understand you've been learning some Danish lessons about the Arctic.
Yes, I'm going to whisk you all the way to Copenhagen to tell you more about a foreign desk ex-confect conversation that we had all about Arctic security.
Foreign desk confect combo. Thank you, Anita. We'll also get the latest business headlines. And finally,
the growth of the United States and bringing visitors to the United States is still a priority, whether it's for leisure or whether it's for business or meetings and conventions.
That is the view of the president and CEO of NYC Tourism among hundreds of guests in Saudi Arabia this week, which is hoping to become a global destination of its own. All that right here on The Briefing with me, Chris Chermak. Welcome to our listeners. Happy Wednesday, everyone. We're going to start today's show with a pretty fast-moving story out of Ukraine. There's been a massive corruption scandal which has engulfed the government, energy sector, led to the suspension, as I mentioned, of the country's justice minister. And here to tell us more is Monocle's writer and Ukrainian expert, Julia Jen. Good afternoon, Julia.
Good afternoon, Chris.
There is a lot to get through here, isn't there?
So much. And it's unfolding as we speak.
It is just unfolding. This is why we do live radio to listeners, so we can catch you up on everything happening in Ukraine. Just bring us up to speed. Set this up a bit for us. What did this anti-corruption investigation find?
So this is an anti-corruption investigation being led by 2 or 3 very admired agencies in Ukraine, very independent and kind of just desperate to get down to the finest granular details. And it's a corruption scandal that has engulfed the energy sector. So we're talking about the production or the kind of manufacturing of protection around energy sector kind of facilities, because these are obviously being targeted hugely by Russia at the moment. So it's affecting that. It's affecting the production of energy and also the defense sector. So
basically everything.
Everything that matters in Ukraine right now. So keeping people connected to light, energy, etc., and also the defense of the country. And it's really affecting 3 main characters. We've got Timur Mindic, who is sort of an unelected official who's very much at the heart of Ukrainian government. He's been affected by corruption scandals in the past. And we've also got the former energy minister who is currently, he was sort of suspended from his post, the justice minister, Halushenko. And we're even seeing some potential involvement of the president himself.
Well, and before we get to the president, tell us a bit more about the justice minister specifically, as that's kind of the highest ranking government official that's involved in this directly. What was his role? Why is he suspended?
So he used to be, as you said, the energy minister. He was in that post from 2021 for 4 years. So he very much had kind of sway over what was going on in terms of energy production and facilities, etc. And he is under suspicion of basically creating a scheme where there was a 10 to 15% sort of gain of hundreds of millions of dollars. So this is huge. And he's very much at the heart of this sort of web that really was affecting, corruption at the heart of energy production in Ukraine, and very much like the protection, as I said, of facilities. And now we also have on tapes, which are, by the way, being released on Telegram by these anti-corruption agencies. We've got them being released on Facebook. We've got them being disseminated and sort of having collaborations with newspapers, so journalists performing really important journalistic work in Ukraine now, Ukrainian journalists, not foreign correspondents. And we've got them even being produced on, sort of shared on Instagram, etc. So this is all over social media. And as I said, kind of little details sort of being shown every sort of half an hour to the public, who are really sitting on this investigation, really focusing on what's going on here.
And these anti-corruption agencies obviously have been in focus for much of this year because there was an effort earlier in the year to potentially undermine their independence. And of course, we've had you on talking about this. There were lots of protests in Ukraine to reverse that decision. Tell us how that's playing out here. Obviously, Volodymyr Zelensky was involved in that too. He wanted to undermine, arguably, the independence of these agencies. Now they've come out and said, look at all this stuff we've found.
Yes, so they are at the centre of Ukraine's democracy, because after the 2013 to 2014 revolution, which is, Ukrainian people deciding they wanted to be with Europe, showing that will, they were set up, these anti-corruption agencies were set up, and they were a legacy of that revolution. And that's really the core legacy of that revolution, along with, different other kind of spheres of culture and society, etc., liberalisation. But these anti-corruption agencies are really at the centre of that. And there, as we saw, this huge anger, because what they do is they hold Ukrainian presidents to account. The Ukrainian people are very sceptical of their presidents because they have slipped up again and again. Sort of every president that there has been in Ukrainian modern history. And what they do is, for example, here, massively holding the president, who at the moment is actually, acting with a lot of sweeping power. Parliament, and this is one of the things I think also is coming out of the scandal, is Parliament wants to be involved, and we're seeing independent MPs, but also MPs within opposition parties working with even some MPs from within the president's own party to bring Parliament back into play, really, because they have lost a lot of their power because of wartime measures that have taken place. And they've even, in the last half an hour, organised a meeting for the 17th of November. So that's just in a few days' time, where they will gather together, MPs will gather together with members of the media and also representatives from high-ranking, basically officials, government officials, and they will quiz them, and there'll be a hearing that will be, we expect, broadcast live for the public to see, people being held to account.
It is so interesting when you mention that, because I do remember we've spoken about, the early stages of this conflict as well when I was in Ukraine too. And I remember at that moment, a lot of the commentary from parliamentarians obviously was this idea that, we must show unity at this point and therefore not question the presidential powers. And even when it came to something like corruption, it was kind of interesting to hear this almost assumption that there won't be corruption right now because we're all working for the same goal, defeating Russia in this war. Is all of that kind of eroding at this point?
I think that if we look at crisis in any country at any point, just think of the COVID crisis here, how much sort of corruption there was going on in this country as well with the procurement scandals, etc. That people stay people, even in the event of a crisis. No one becomes a hero, really. And even saints have their flaws. So I think that we can't have too rosy a vision of Ukraine or of the world around us, really. And we can't expect how we as humans would also react in these scandals. But I think that what's happening here is very much that sense of holding the president to account despite what's going on in the country, or if in fact, because of that dire need of people just to have basic protection against the enemy, Russia, who are trying to attack, who are attacking Ukraine every single day, both on the front line. And I think this is really affecting, soldiers as well, like soldier morale. I saw a really interesting post from one sort of family friend, soldier who I follow on Facebook, follow his posts, and he wrote, on one hand, I don't want to be disillusioned by what's happening, but on the other hand, why am I sitting here on the edge of civilization? He says it feels like the edge of civilization for him. On that front line, he's sitting in that trench day after day, and he says, why am I sitting here so that someone can steal behind my back, which is exactly what the Russians would have done, because we know that corruption is such a deep-rooted part of sort of Russian governmental structures. And we know exactly that they would have brought that in if the occupation would have happened. So I think there's a lot of pride in what the anti-corruption agencies are doing, and there's a real need for them to hold, and for Parliament to get involved here and hold the government to account.
Just finally, Julia, before we let you go, I did want to ask you about Poland very quickly, because there was a massive protest yesterday. This is related to Poland's own Independence Day, which kind of gets co-opted by the far right, essentially, in the country. What does that look like, especially to you from Ukraine, to see those kind of pictures? The president was involved as well.
Yes, so the president was very much there, Nawrocki, at the march in Warsaw, and we saw the Prime Minister, Donald Tusk, in Gdańsk, which is his hometown, And he was sort of saying, look at all this love that we can see in Gdansk from the huge march that he was at. And he said some people haven't picked up that love, sort of an allusion to what Nawrocki was doing in Warsaw, where we had those, classic far-right symbols of flares being set off, the colour red sort of filling the sky.
Burning of the European Union flag.
Absolutely, a huge anti-Brussels sentiments there. I think that this tension between Ukrainians and Poles is centuries long. I'm a living testament to it. My mother is Ukrainian, my father is Polish. So I've seen this play out, within family dynamics. But I think here this is a very difficult moment for Polish-Ukrainian relations. I think in terms of defence, President Nawrocki himself, who is kind of associated now with this march, with these far-right elements, he's very much focused on Polish defence. But I think there's a misunderstanding really growing between Ukrainian elements of society, because they're Polish, in these marches, they were calling for mass deportations. And we know exactly who they want to deport, because there is only really one mass minority group in Polish society that they're focusing on. So I think it's tricky. It's a tricky time.
It is a tricky relationship. Julia Jen, Monocle's writer and researcher, Ukraine expert. Thank you very much for joining us. And now here's Hassan Anderson with the day's other news headlines.
Thanks, Chris. The USS Gerald R. Ford, the Pentagon's largest aircraft carrier, has entered Latin American waters amid rising tensions with Venezuela. Washington has said the move boosts regional security and counter-narcotics operations. The deployment marks the largest US military presence in the region since the invasion of Panama in 1989. Australia and Indonesia have announced a new watershed security treaty that commits them to consult at a leader and ministerial level if either country faces a threat. The pact expands regular defence cooperation and is expected to be formally signed next year. It also includes provisions on maritime surveillance, cybersecurity and intelligence sharing. In Brazil, indigenous demonstrators forced their way into the COP30 venue in Belém, briefly clashing with security. Bearing signs that read "Our forests are not for sale," protesters demanded stronger guarantees for land rights and greater representation in the summit's decision-making process. The UN says the site is now secure and climate negotiations are continuing. Those are the day's headlines. Back to you, Chris.
Thanks very much, Hassan. We are going to take a look now into the pages of our sister publication, Confect, because the new winter issue is coming out this week and there is an Arctic wind blowing through it. Joining me now to explain why I said that is Monocle Radio's producer of the Foreign Desk, Anita Riota. Anita, you sort of went to the Arctic. You went to Copenhagen. I mean, it's close enough. It has a close relationship with the Arctic. Tell us about this.
I did. The Foreign Desk and Confect teamed up for Confect's winter issue to deliver this Confect conversation about Arctic security, looking at how its Nordic neighbors are sort of casting its eye up to this region that it's always had a relationship to, but has really garnered so much more international attention, really even maybe in the last 12 months. And so trying to see how all of this new geopolitical attention fits in to a Nordic relationship with the Arctic and really how the Arctic sees itself and its own security.
And tell me about this approach, because this is the first time you've done one of these discussions for Confect. It's kind of a thing that has been going on in this magazine for a while, a dinner, or in this case, a lunch discussion around geopolitics.
It is such an incredible format, I think, and it really sets, me as the host up for success, not only because I get to go have a delicious meal in a beautiful restaurant in Copenhagen, which you can see in the gorgeous photos that are in the spread, but also because there's something about sitting around at a table and sharing a meal that allowed our expert guests to just freely flow through conversation, I think, much faster than you would in maybe a traditionally moderated panel. I came armed with all my research and all my notes, but I think a lot of the most fascinating elements of the conversations was teased out by the guests, mentioning something and then someone else is able to jump onto that topic immediately, and you're able to tease out so much of their knowledge, and we're able to make so many interesting intersections between their work that maybe in a more regimented format you miss all of this excitement that comes with that.
Well, and speaking of those intersections, I'm just curious what this panel made of the fact that the Arctic really has, as you mentioned, kind of burst onto the scene this year.
I think there was a lot of surprise, maybe a bit of just looking on with interest and fascination. I do think we had one of our guests say, we used to think of Arctic exceptionalism. We used to think about the fact that the Arctic was considered a place of low tension and high cooperation, and how much that has changed really, as we're saying, maybe in just the last calendar year. We had one of our guests make this, I thought, fascinating observation that part of the concept or the, traditional view of the Arctic as this final frontier, which is a problematic notion, and we did get into that in the article. But this frontier mentality has actually turned the Arctic into something that American tech bros see as the new invocation of America's manifest destiny. We went into so many different angles that I wasn't even necessarily expecting, but I think, there's some excitement. I think there's some positivity that the Arctic has so much to offer and has so much history and so much culture that it is exciting to be able to share that with the world. And also a lot of apprehension that a lot of the actors that are looking towards the Arctic with this renewed or, novel interest are not doing so with the necessarily best of intentions.
I think what was interesting about the way that they talked about this as well, to kind of flip it on its head, was the fact that now there's all this international attention. But when you look at Denmark, the Arctic has always been a thing. There was one guest who even talked about, you have exchanges with Greenland. It's taught in schools. Did that strike you? Just that relationship that Denmark has with the Arctic?
Absolutely. I mean, it's a history that goes back a long way. It's sometimes a painful history, and we got into those elements of the conversation. But I think, it was really interesting to hear how these Nordic guests conceptualize the Arctic as a part of their personal identities, as part of their national identities, how that varies, obviously, from Nordic country to Nordic country, because it's not a one-size-fits-all relationship. And so there's just so much to get into there that we just wouldn't necessarily know, because it's a very unique relationship, and it was really fascinating to sort of get into the weeds of that.
And just quickly, Anita, as you say, the Foreign Desk will also be about the Arctic, kind of in conjunction with this. What's your approach there for this weekend?
I think this was one of the most fun elements of this partnership, was that both Confect and the Foreign Desk, we sort of encouraged one another to take on a slightly different approach. We brought a conversation to Confect's pages that feature Finnish icebreakers and Chinese shipbuilding. And this week on the Foreign Desk, yes, we are looking at Arctic security, but we're taking our time also to get into the elements that were brought out from this Confect conversation about the more romantic notions of the Arctic. How does it loom in people's imaginations? We're very excited to have an incredible photographer join us to tell us about his many expeditions and what it really feels like and sounds like and looks like to be there on the ground. So my hope is that we have sort of brought the best out of one another, and so that you can experience all that the Foreign Desk and all that Confect has to offer.
Anita Riota, thank you very much for joining us. Do check out Confect on newsstands and the Foreign Desk coming out this weekend. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. Time now to get the latest business headlines with Ewan Potts from Bloomberg. Ewan, good to have you on the show as always. We're going to start with something I do believe we've spoken about before on this show, the ever-rising government debt levels around the world. Is it leading to a rethink among bond investors? Is it having an impact on interest payments?
Yeah, those debt levels just keep on growing. Now, when it comes to risk and therefore borrowing costs, government debt, at least government debt of rich countries, has always been the gold standard. A short-dated US government bond is said to carry a risk-free rate of return. If you lend money to the US government for 3 months, the chance of them not repaying that debt is pretty much zero. And because of that lower risk, governments, at least those with a good credit score, get the lowest borrowing costs. So there's the lowest yield on their bonds. Now, that's always been the case. But something strange has been happening in the global bond market, a bond market which is worth $150 trillion. Investors have recently been coming to the conclusion that some companies are actually safer bets than even the most powerful governments. And the result is that investors are now offering lower yields for bonds issued by Microsoft than those issued by the US government. And they're offering lower yields for the bonds of L'Oreal than the French government, or from Siemens than the German government. And the driving force of all of this is not just that the companies have their debt under control, but that governments just don't. So governments all around the world have soaring levels of debt at the moment. In France and the UK and the US, around about 100% of GDP we're now at. In money terms, that means the US government is in debt to the tune of some $38 trillion. Now, these debts are enormous and they are still growing. Investors really concerned that governments haven't really got a grip on these debts. And so that is pushing up the cost of borrowing in many cases. And it is also widening that gap between corporate borrowing and government borrowing.
Ewan, just to follow up on that very quickly, but this is really a paradigm shift, or it sounds like one. The idea that companies would actually be able to borrow at better rates than governments. I mean, is it a paradigm shift? Are investors seeing it that way?
But it's certainly pretty unusual. I mean, of course, these things do shift around because at the moment the corporate sector is not particularly heavily indebted. And a lot of governments, well, they certainly are. We're not in a recession at the moment. The US economy is doing pretty well, but the deficit in the US is still above 6%. And Donald Trump's been cutting taxes. In fairness, there is some money coming from tariffs, but there's still a yawning gap in US government finances. And we know that the state of the French budget has been causing all sorts of political trouble. They can't get that budget through, a massive deficit in France. In the UK, we're 2 weeks away from a budget where taxes are likely to rise because borrowing is still continuing. We've still got a deficit this year in the UK of over £100 billion. So governments everywhere are just struggling to contain these deficits, and the political pressures are for them to get bigger. And I think, bond investors have really got their eye on that.
Well, it does make you wonder when the dam might burst, but I'm sure we'll bring you on again, Ewan, to talk about that. Just finally, when you mentioned President Trump, it's nearing 1 year in office for him, and one of the promises he gave to voters is to get America's miners back to work. How's that been going?
Yeah, for all of Donald Trump's rhetoric about clean and beautiful coal, US coal demand actually fell more than 20%, in fact, during his first term. But so far, the evidence from his second term looks like being rather better news for the miners and rather worse news for US carbon emissions. US use of coal this year is set to show its biggest jump, in fact, in 40 years. But it's fair to say that it has fallen very rapidly over the preceding period. This year's coal usage will, in fact, still be 60% less than the peak year, which is all the way back in 2007. Now, in part, this rise is due to Trump's policies, including using emergency laws to keep some coal-fired power stations open. But one of the other key parts of this story is rising electricity demand. And that's a trend that predates Trump's re-election and is very much fueled by the AI boom we've spoken about and all those data centers being built. So that is playing a big part in this as well. In fact, the additional coal-fired power generation in the US this year is actually greater than the extra solar capacity which has come online. And it is many times greater than the wind capacity added by the US. So it's been the biggest source of extra electricity generating capacity in the US this year. Just looking globally, while the increase in total coal demand has been slowing in recent years, a decade after the Paris Climate Agreement, the world is still on course to consume more coal this year than ever before.
A decade after the Paris Climate Agreement, and as government ministers and leaders are negotiating in Brazil for COP30. Some sobering news there. Ewan Potts, thank you very much for joining us. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. We'll head to Riyadh now in Saudi Arabia, which is hosting a global tourism summit that claims as its aim to rewrite the rules of global travel. It's a bold claim that comes as Saudi Arabia has been looking to open itself up to international tourism in a manner that would have been unimaginable just a few years ago. We'll hear from our Gulf correspondent Inzamam Rashid in a moment, but first, let's hear from one of the attendees he spoke with, Julie Coker, President and CEO of NYC Tourism. Inzi began by asking her about Mayor-elect Mamdani in New York, his recent election, and whether she's worried about the challenges that could come from Trump and the White House.
I don't. And I say that confidently because it comes down to business, and it comes down to putting the United States first, and it comes down to putting New York City first. And so the two gentlemen, I think, will work well together because it's going to be for the good of New York, which is going to be the good of the United States. And the role that New York City plays in the United States, especially as it comes to travel and tourism, can never, ever be ignored. Again, the fact that we had 64 million visitors come to our city alone. And so they'll find common ground around that. The success of the United States, which obviously a big part of that comes from New York City, is what they will rally around. But the last thing that I would say is a visit to New York still delivers. It doesn't matter who the mayor is, the governor, or the president of the United States. The Brooklyn Bridge is still the Brooklyn Bridge. A slice of pizza in the middle of Times Square is just that. The holiday decorations that we are putting up now, the tree at Rockefeller Center, the ice skating rink, all of those things will continue to be the same. And so that's what we really lean into. We're still the same destination. Statue of Liberty is still the most iconic, welcoming symbol of the United States and really around the world.
You could see them getting around the table together and actually getting along.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, it's business. And the growth of the United States and bringing visitors to the United States is still a priority, whether it's for leisure or whether it's for business or meetings and conventions.
Finally, from me, if I may, a lot of the Middle Eastern tourists, Arab countries, the Gulf countries do visit New York. They love it. It's usually on many kind of people's holiday calendar throughout the year. What's the push to get Americans, to get New York residents out to places like the Middle East, to the Gulf, to the UAE, to Riyadh, and experience what the offer is here?
The first I'm going to lift up is storytelling. And I think the storytelling between both countries, lifting up to those coming from the Middle East, why they should be coming to the United States and why they should be coming from New York, and vice versa. And we can definitely collaborate on that storytelling effectively to make sure that New Yorkers understand how absolutely amazing this country is and how the changes that are taking place and how this is a must-see, must-do, put on your bucket list kind of destination. The other thing is, when it comes to international travel is airlift. And making sure that we have the right connectivity between the two countries is extremely important. And then the last thing that I would talk about is just making sure that the visa process. So travel has to be seamless. It has to be easy. It has to be being uncomplicated. Anyone, whether you have money or not, should be able to understand the process and should be able to take advantage of travel. And I think that's the beauty between both countries. We have seasons. And so those that may need a more affordable time to come to New York, absolutely January, February. And I would venture to say here it would be the summer. So we have something, both countries have something for everyone. But that connectivity and airlift will be extremely important going forward. And also to the ease of travel between the countries, and the visa process has to be seamless on both sides.
And that's something you can directly work towards with your counterparts?
We continue to work very closely with U.S. Travel and Brand USA to lift up the message. We do go through U.S. Travel to speak to the administration on the importance of making sure how easy it is and to bring down visa wait times. That has been a priority of Jeff Freeman and U.S. Travel, and it will continue to be.
Julie Coker, President and CEO of NYC Tourism there. And joining us now is Monocle's Gulf correspondent Inzamam Rashid, who just conducted that interview. Inzi, greetings to Riyadh.
Yeah, greetings from Riyadh's palatial King Abdulaziz International Conference Centre, Chris. It is home to Tourize 2025, and it's an absolutely stunning setting in the heart of the capital of Saudi Arabia. And it's incredibly busy as well, I have to admit.
I'm sure it is extremely busy, and I want to get into some of that, but I have to start with this interview we just heard from Julie. I found this fascinating, the way that she is presenting the U.S. and New York at a pretty delicate time for the U.S. I mean, just business, Trump Mamdani sitting around a table. Do we buy that?
Yeah, it was a difficult picture to paint, but she seemed very confident when I asked her about it. You know, she spoke heavily about Mamdani's involvement in New York, not just for its residents, but also ensuring that it continues to deliver as a tourist destination. And she said that she's looking forward to working alongside him. But there was that big question about the challenges that New York will face. Obviously, a city that has created Trump and created the man that he is today, essentially the president of the United States, and whether he will actually come down with some force to Mamdani. I think that's the big question. But you know, the CEO of the tourism board in New York feeling very confident that the two men will get on. I think we'll have to wait and see for that one.
Now, Inzi, there are a lot of people from around the world there, as you say, and beyond the United States. I did want to start actually with what this means for Saudi Arabia itself, because this is a big moment for them to have so many people talking about tourism in the country. Is this the moment that Saudi Arabia kind of declares itself open to tourism? Is that what this is about?
I think what the Saudis would say is that they've probably already done that. I think what this moment probably marks, Chris, is a shift that Saudi actually wants to be a world leader in tourism, not just in the sense of people coming here and visiting Saudi, but actually they want a seat at the table where they are making decisions for worldwide tourism. And that's why they've put on this conference. It's the inaugural Tourize conference, not Tories as I was calling it for the last couple of days, but and got told off by the CEO of the Saudi Tourism Authority. It's called Tourize because they want to rise in tourism, apparently. 8,000 delegates over the 3 days here. We are on day 2. There's around 140 speakers on already, Chris. There's been billions of dollars of investment agreements been signed. And Saudi Arabia's messaging throughout this is unmistakable. It intends to be that convener, not just a participant. They want to shape the future of global tourism. And what they've done quite cleverly here as well, because, you know, I'm sure you've been to many of them as well, and I'm sure many of our listeners have as well, to tourism, hospitality kind of conferences around the world where a lot of conversation takes place. But what action actually comes out of those conversations? You've got panels on the stage, you know, moderators from different media organizations around the world. What actual action comes as a result of that? And it seems very different here because already they've implemented action. They're talking specifically about the launch of a destination alliance, which has been co-chaired with a number of mayors around the world, and that they're proposing a visa by visa platform designing to streamline cross-border travel for millions. The aim here is to really kind of unite sectors that rarely share a stage, from finance and technology to urban planning to hospitality as well, to travel, all under one expansive Saudi roof.
Monocle's Gulf correspondent Inzamam Rashid, thank you very much for painting a picture from Tourize in Saudi Arabia. That's all the time we have for this edition of The Briefing. It was produced by Hassan Anderson. Our researcher was Joanna Moser, and our studio manager was Steph Chungu. The Briefing is back tomorrow at the same time. I'm Chris Chermak. Goodbye, and thanks for listening.